I live in a house in the country near El Dorado, Texas. I woke up one morning and looked out my bedroom window toward my chicken coop, and I saw a figure standing there. Judging by the height of the coop, the creature was at least 7 feet tall. The only way to describe it is that it looked like a Chewbacca, the way its hair flowed and the fact that you couldn't see a neck. Well, I rubbed my eyes several times, but it was still there. It was like it wanted me to see it. It wanted to be seen. It just stood there looking at the house. Finally, I looked away, and when I looked back again, it was gone. I never said anything for a while. Although I never saw it again, I would carry my pistol if I went outside after dark. After that, we would hear strange sounds at night, but we never saw anything again. Now, my friend had a run-in with a dog man, but that was months later. We had a tracker come in to look around, but he found nothing, or at least nothing that he would admit to. I told my family, and they gave me the strangest looks. Some of them think I should quit listening to shows like yours. They think I'm seeing things. Oh, well, these stories are great. People are seeing things, and I'm just so glad you sent this in. It was a short little story, but it was great. In 1999, I was a tradesman working on an apartment complex that was being built in my town. I operated my own company, and I was working after the bulk of the trades had left for the day. I was finishing my task in one unit, and I was gathering my tools to do the same thing in the neighboring unit, and I was moving quickly to take advantage of the daylight. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a figure outside the window. When I turned my head to look, the person was gone. There were other apartments in the area that were inhabited, so I thought someone was taking a shortcut through the construction site. When I got to the next unit, I looked at the window in the back and I saw the coast was clear. But while I was working, I got the sensation that someone was watching me. I turned to the back window again and got a glimpse of a shadow as it walked away. It was the same figure I had seen earlier. When I finished my work, I moved upstairs. These apartments did not yet have the decks installed on the back side of the building, so I didn't think it was necessary to even entertain the possibility that this figure would be there. While I installed the fixtures on the second floor unit, I felt that feeling again. I knew someone was watching me, and when I looked over my shoulder, I saw a man with a hat and a jacket outside the window. I had no clue what he was standing on because the balcony was not there. I turned around and looked at him, and he stared back at me, expressionless. I was nervous and dangerously close to being behind schedule for the project. I finally said out loud, "Well, if you're here to help, I could use a hand. If not, my insurance will not cover you on my job site." And after I said that, he left. I decided to leave and come back the next day to finish. But before I went to bed for the night, I made a sketch of the man that I saw. The next morning, I was getting dressed for work when my wife watched TV. It was a Saturday morning, and I asked her what she was watching. She said she was watching Poltergeist. She said it's a good movie. I told her that I had never seen it, and I started lacing up my boots. I glanced at the TV and saw something that caught my attention. A familiar-looking ghost walked across the road in a crosswalk. I couldn't believe what I saw. I went and got a sketch that I drew from the day before, and I handed it to my wife, and I asked her if she could rewind the movie to that scene. She looked from my sketch to the TV, and she said, "Are you sure you haven't seen this movie before?" I told her I hadn't, even though the actor looked just like the man in my sketch. I didn't tell her what I saw out the second floor window the day before. I didn't want to scare her or look stupid. It took about a month or two for me not to get startled whenever I saw a flat-brimmed farmer's hat. In 2015, my son and I were hunting in south-central Colorado. We were tent camping like we always do, and I brought 2 different propane heaters along with the 3 cold-weather sleeping bags just to be safe. Long story short, neither heater would work at the elevation that we were at, so we ended up placing our heavy-duty hunting cots right next to each other. That way we could share the third sleeping bag across the top of us. The low that night was in the upper 20s, but we were okay. Before I went to bed that night, I pumped up the pressure really good in my Coleman lantern and I left it on low. It was hanging in a tree in case either of us had to go relieve ourselves in the middle of the night. Around midnight, not long after I fell asleep, I woke up to my son tapping me on my shoulder. "Dad, there's something outside the tent. I can hear it breathing," he said. Slowly, I reached over and grabbed my 9mm off the table next to me. My son's cot was up against the back wall and my cot was next to his. I lay there silently, holding my gun, and I could clearly hear something outside breathing. He was right. From the angle I was lying and the position of the sounds, I estimated the height of our visitor to be in the 10-foot range. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears and I was on full alert. I told my son to plug his ears. I heard this thing slowly walk around the corner of the tent and then stop. Then I heard a second creature come to the tent from a different angle, and I knew I needed to make some noise. "No, no, no," I shouted, making myself known. These things stopped in their tracks, right before they cast a shadow onto the side of the tent from the lantern. I heard them slowly back away, but their footsteps weren't heavy like I heard about in some other stories. When we got up in the morning, I looked around our tent and the frost-covered grass, but there was not a single track to be found. I don't have any idea who visited our camp that night, but I do know I've never been so scared in my life. "I know what came to your camp, brother." "I'm pretty sure we all know what came to your camp. That's a cool story, scary story. Thank you for sending it. It was great." I am an outdoorsman and I live in Middle Tennessee. During the last deer season, I was out hunting one evening with my bow, trying to spot and stalk a deer, when I felt the sudden urge to look up at a nearby sycamore tree. There, hovering by the branches, I saw a brown object that somewhat resembled the Batman symbol, if you were to cut off the ears and jagged the edges. It was some sort of flying, silent creature. It wasn't a bat, but it wasn't a bird. This thing just hovered there above me for what felt like forever, and when it finally moved from its stationary position, it shot straight up in the sky until I couldn't see it anymore. That was the most interesting UFO encounter I've had up close, but I've seen more than my fair share at a distance. In fact, I see white lights in the sky so consistently that it's become as interesting to me as seeing an ordinary plane pass by. They never make any sound, and I'll notice multiple of them in a night. The lights don't blink, and their speeds vary dramatically. Sometimes they move slowly and other times incredibly fast. Sometimes I see them ascend into the sky, and sometimes they shoot up rapidly and disappear. I hope you get to see them one night. All you have to do is look up and wait. I'm going to drop in an old story that I uploaded to this podcast a few years ago. It's about 20 minutes long, but it's an exceptionally good story. I hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, the writer's name is Todd, and here's what he writes. Hold on to your weave, son. I got a strange story from Ohio to tell you. I hope someone who was in that campground that night or who lives in the area and heard it will remember the event and write in or comment. It happened at a campground with a lake just outside of Wilmington, Ohio during the summer vacation of 1983. I was almost 18 and my girlfriend was 17 at the time. Today, Becky and I have been married for 35 years. That's cool, man. That's an awesome... I could end right there and just be happy for you, Todd. That's awesome. But let's get on with your story. The campground consisted of 30 to 50 permanent campsites for trailers and RVs, I think, and there was also an area to the west end for overnight tent campers. On the south side of the lake was some woods that wrapped around to the east and the west. There were 40 yards of open area to the north side of the lake that reached down to a little beach area with the rest of the north shore set aside for fishing access. We were there with my best friend John, who was 19, and his girlfriend Judy, who was 21, and as such was the designated purchaser of alcohol for our group. They've been married now for 36 years. Oh, man, that's awesome. John and Judy, 36 years, that's great. Judy's dad and older brother had adjacent permanent campsites at the campground, and since they were going to the races that weekend, the trailers were available. Because Becky and I were the only other couple in our little group of about a dozen friends, we were invited to join John and Judy for a romantic weekend getaway. Judy worked at Stump's grocery store at the Forest Park Plaza, so we picked her up there on Friday night when she finished her shift. While we were there, we purchased the supplies that we would need for the weekend, and then we headed out. We arrived a couple of hours before sundown and set up camp. The campground was packed with activity. Kids were riding their bikes on the gravel road that snaked its way through the park. People were walking their dogs, and men were riding around in their golf carts visiting neighbors. Several people stopped by to check up on Judy and ask about her dad and her brother. Off to the races was the standard reply. Soon we grilled our dinner, and the girls had gotten the trailers ready for the night. After that, we all sat around the campfire ring swapping stories, enjoying each other's company and relaxing to the sounds of the southern Ohio summer night. The bugs, the frogs, and the nighttime birds created a wondrous symphony of calming sound. A couple of hours after dark, we all decided it was time to turn in for the night. Before we went to bed, we had to tidy up our campsite, and John and I were churning the fire with a shovel when out of nowhere, and I mean like out of left field, we heard from way off in the distance what sounded like a woman screaming bloody murder. It was like her arms were being ripped from her body. John looked at me as if to say, "Man, what are we hearing?" The girls came over with us with puzzled expressions on their faces. 20 seconds into the scream, it changed to what sounded like a baby crying. That lasted for another 20 seconds, and then there was nothing. We could hear the normal night sounds all around us, but the screaming stopped. The other campers burst out into chatter. "What was that? What the hell was that?" And a bounty of other anxious comments could be heard from every direction. We were certainly adding our share. The entire campground was abuzz with excitement and activity for another 10 or 15 minutes before everyone began to calm down and turn in for the night. We decided whatever it was far enough away that it wasn't going to bother us. John and Judy took her parents' trailer, and Becky and I were in Judy's brother's trailer. Once inside, Becky and I were winding down, smoking a cigarette, and having a pretty lively discussion about what had just happened. "What exactly did you hear?" she asked. And then before I could answer, she added, "I heard a woman screaming in distress. Then it changed into like a baby crying." "Yeah, that's exactly what I heard," I said. "Well, what do you think it was?" "I think it was a bobcat," she said, again not letting me answer. "You know, they're still in Ohio." Well, I quickly answered, "Well, I don't know about that. There are mountain lions down in the Smokies, and with the warm weather, maybe one of them made its way up here into Ohio." We both pondered that for a moment before she asked, "How did it cross the Ohio River then?" "He crossed over the Brent Spence Bridge like everyone else," I quipped. "Oh, you're funny. I suppose he did it during rush hour, too," she exclaimed as she threw her shirt at me. "Well, he did sound like one pissed off cat," I laughed. We began to ponder again, and she climbed into bed. A stream of ideas came to me, and I said, "You know, maybe some local has an exotic cat as a pet. Or we aren't too far from Cincinnati. Maybe some rich guy or Reds player, or even better, a Bengals player, bought themselves a big cat and it escaped." Her reply was, "Wouldn't we have heard about that on the news?" "Well, not necessarily," I answered. "If they didn't have the right permits to own an exotic pet and it escaped, they wouldn't want to get into trouble, so they ain't going to call anybody." Remember Shannon? Her family had to move to Michigan because Ohio passed that law where you have to have a permit to own exotic pets. Her family had those 2 cheetahs, but they didn't get the permits. Oh, yeah, you're right, she said. Now, get your butt in bed. Now, see there? Don't you feel better about it and all? I answered, returning a grin. Yes, come to bed already, she groaned. I had no sooner turned off the light when I heard the faint sound of a baby crying. I turned to Becky and saw her eyes getting bigger and knew she was hearing it too. Before either of us could speak a word, the sound changed to the woman screaming bloody murder again. A cat, remember, it's just a cat, I spoke up quickly. It's a very big cat, she added. From inside the trailer, the sound was faint, but we could still hear it as it changed into something like a jungle cat's growl. And then it became more like a lion's roar. And then it changed yet again to what we have come to refer to as a mix of an angry King Kong versus Godzilla. With the eyes as big as saucers and our jaws dropped to our chests, we stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but it was in reality only a few seconds. What the hell was that? Becky whispered. Before I could answer, the damn thing started up again. This time it started with the King Kong versus Godzilla roar, followed by a bear's roar. I burst out of our trailer to find John poking his head out of his. The growl had already changed to that of a lion and now morphing into that of a jungle cat's growl. When it changed back into the screaming woman, John muttered, "What is that?" The sound faded back into that of a baby crying, and John came out to stand beside me. The campground was beginning to come to life again. Someone yelled, "Can someone shut that thing up?" Someone else said, "What is that?" Further down still, another camper asked, "Did you hear that?" Standing outside, it sounded louder and closer than when we heard it earlier that night, though it still seemed to be coming from the same general direction, which was southwest of the campgrounds. We stood there for several seconds, lost in thought as we anticipated the next sound. "How far away do you think it is?" John asked, startling me back to reality. "And do you have any ideas, Sherlock?" he added before I could answer. Well, sarcastically calling me Sherlock was a running gag between us brought on by my frequent use of the phrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson, elementary." But this time he sounded nervous. "Becky and I thought it might be a big cat, like a bobcat or a mountain lion," I told him. "A mountain lion in Ohio?" I was sure he was going to add, "Are you nuts?" But I cut him off by adding, "Or it could be someone who owns a big cat. Remember Shannon?" He looked puzzled for a moment before remembering and saying, "Oh yeah, the girl with the cool-looking jungle cats." "They were cheetahs," I corrected him. "Have you ever heard anything like that before? Those parts that sound like a bear, I mean? The big gorilla or something?" he asked. I noted a bit of quiver in his voice. "It was a regular King Kong," I said, unwilling to give a direct answer. We snapped our heads back to the southwest as the baby crying sound started up again. The depth and duration of the calls was unbelievable. It wasn't like it was one sound, take a breath and then another. It was one continuous deep call lasting anywhere from 50 seconds to 2 minutes, transforming from baby to woman to animal in one breath. The lung capacity of whatever was out there had to be massive, and the range was incomprehensible. John and I stood there looking at each other, mentally repeating the same question everyone was asking. What was this thing? It still sounded like it was pretty far off in the distance. I was guessing around 5 to 10 miles away. Alarming, yes, but I didn't feel like we were in any danger. That's why John's next statement caught me off guard. "Man, we have shotguns in the trailers and spotlights, if we need them. Let me show you where yours are in the trailer." We went inside and he showed me where the shotgun and box of shells were. And then he pulled out a spotlight and we made sure the battery was working. It was one of those old 1960s handheld lights made with the VW Beetle headlight attached to a metal battery box that had a handle on it. I don't remember the gauge of the shotgun, but I do remember that it held 5 shells and it was a pump action. John, Becky, and I then went outside and stood for 20 minutes. It had been half an hour or more since we last heard its call when John broke the silence with, "Well, I'll see you guys in the morning. Good night." "Hey, I'm only a year younger than you, old man," I replied. John turned and went back to his trailer with a smile on his face. When we went back inside, Becky peppered me with questions about what John and I thought it was. I'm not sure how long we stayed up, but I can say one thing for sure: the night no longer had any romantic feeling. I don't know how long it was until we heard it again, but I would venture to guess it was around an hour later when King Kong started up again. By the time it had worked its way to the jungle cat, I was out the door with my shoes on, a shotgun in one hand and the spotlight in the other. It was no longer just a faint sound inside the trailer. Outside it was even louder, and now it sounded like it was just across the lake. John was out his door almost as fast as I was, and he was wearing his shoes and carrying his gun and his light as well. The whole campground seemed to be awake. People were coming out of their trailers and RVs and gathering in small groups. John and I walked down to the road as the call wound down to the baby crying. "That sounds just like it's across the lake," John said, confirming my earlier thought. We were standing at the edge of the road closest to the lake, where there was mostly open field. The woods across the lake were silent as a grave. Gone was the music of the night dwellers. The insects, the frogs, and any other wildlife all seemed to be holding their collective breath. We could hear the people from the campground behind us talking and opening and closing doors. And after a few minutes, a couple in their 30s and a man in his 50s joined us where we stood. We formed a little group, made our introductions, and then quickly turned our conversation to the same questions we'd all been asking for hours. Another man walked past us and called to us, "It's a banshee. Man, I tell you, it's a banshee." We all chuckled nervously, but swallowed our laughter when all hell broke loose across the lake. The baby crying started again, followed by the cracking of wood. It sounded like a bulldozer was tearing through that timber. In my lifetime, I have heard and seen deer, elk, moose, and bears crash through the forest. Nothing, and I mean nothing, even come close to the cracking of wood that we heard that night. John and I spun around and flipped on our light. As the call changed from the baby crying to the woman screaming, we could clearly see the trees and bushes shaking, but we couldn't see what it was making the commotion. It was coming from the southwest and heading east. By the time the call had made its usual gamut of jungle cat to lion to bear to King Kong versus Godzilla, it had made it halfway to the bottom stretch of the lake. The guy who walked by with the banshee theory ran past us at a dead sprint back to his trailer. Oh, God, that's funny. Okay, I'm not laughing or ridiculing anyone. Just want to be clear there. I just thought that sentence was funny. I do have a sense of humor. We could still see the trees and bushes swaying back and forth as the thing made its way to the east side of the lake. The woman in our little group said to no one in particular, "My God, what is that thing?" And then, as an afterthought, she added, "And what are we going to do about it?" It wasn't screaming anymore, but we could still see it crashing through the woods. It was halfway to the road that dead-ended in the woods on the east side of the lake. But there it could easily run up the east side road about 100 yards or so right into the campground. We were all sizing up the situation and formulating possible outcomes. Not more than a year before that night, I had watched the movie Rambo. Furthermore, I was a big fan of Billy Jack movies from the 1970s. As if that wasn't enough, I saw myself as a hoodlum from the mean streets of Dayton, Ohio. So it should come as no surprise that I was thinking John and I should head over to the East Side Road, cut this thing off at the pass, and teach it a lesson by filling it full of lead. I was just about to make that very suggestion when John said, "I don't know about you guys, but we're getting the hell out of here now." The rest of us were so startled by John's words that we just stood there dumbfounded as he walked away. A second later, we sprung into action, each of us heading back to our respective trailers. I didn't catch up with John until we were almost to the trailers, and the girls were dressed and standing outside, and they were waiting for us. "Get the stuff packed, girls," he barked. "We're out of here." They were way ahead of us. All we had to do was put away the guns, lock up the trailers, and jump in the car and go. It must have taken us a good 20 minutes to get out of the campground because of the traffic. It looked more than half of the campers were heading home. We kept a watchful eye on the east road as we sat in the long line of cars, but nothing ever came out of the woods. Once we'd answered all the girls' questions, the ride home was pretty quiet. We never heard anything about it on the news, and after a week or so, the frenzied questions and the retelling of the story to our group of friends died down. Over the years, Beck and I have shared this story with various new friends that we've met. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a Dixie Cryptid video with Becky, and she suggested that I send the story. So here it is, and we're sticking to it. There were a lot of people in that campground that night, and a lot of them left, not to mention all the people who lived in a 20 square mile radius of the campground. We would love to hear from anyone who experienced those strange calls in the summer of 1983. And one other thing, I often wonder what would happen that night if I had spoken up first with my Billy Jack plan. I guess we'll never know. Thank goodness. Oh man, what a great story. Nobody was hurt. Everybody was just scared, and you heard a really unique sound. I mean, it sounded like it went on all night, Todd. But I don't know what else to say about this story. This man obviously has a sense of humor, unlike some of the really curmudgeon Bigfoot people in the Bigfoot community. But this guy has a sense of humor. And he can laugh. He can actually laugh at himself, and I love these kind of stories. I really appreciate him sending it. Thank you for clicking on this podcast and listening this far. If you listen this far, I really appreciate it. You all are always so good to me in the comments section and so good to come back and listen. I wish there was something I could say or do to let you know how much I appreciate you, but I do. I hope you can feel it. That's the end of this podcast. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.